Okay, hi guys, and welcome back to ninth grade Integrated 1. Today's lesson, we're going to be solving quadratic equations. I know last week in class we practiced using the graphing method. Today we're going to look at factoring to solve these quadratic equations. And we're going to do that using the GCF, the difference of squares, and the X method. So we see our first problem here says x squared minus 5x equals 0. And I'm seeing that it says look for greatest common factor. Right off the bat, I'm noticing that this term here has an x and this term here has an x. So I know that I can pull out an x in this problem and be left with x minus 5 equals 0. We now have two equations. We have x equals 0 and we have x minus 5 equals 0. To isolate that x, I'm going to add 5 to both sides and I'm going to be left with x equals 5 and x equals 0. So we were able to find our two solutions using the GCF. Let's go ahead and look at this next problem. It says x squared minus 25 equals 0. So I'm seeing it says look for subtraction and a perfect square. So when I see this subtraction sign and I recognize that this number is a perfect square, I know that I can use my difference of square method. I have some of my perfect squares jotted down right here on the corner, which is just 1, 4, 9, 16, 25, 36, 49, so on, so on, so on. This list goes on. All this means is a perfect square is that we can take the square root of this number and it'll give us a really nice number. So when doing the difference of squares, we know that our factors are just going to turn it into the square root of that term there. So we know that it's going to be x plus 5 times x minus 5. Again, because plus or minus 5 is the square root of 25. If we solve this, we have x plus 5 equals 0. We have x minus 5 equals 0. We're going to subtract 5 from both sides, and we'll be left with x equals negative 5. Over here, we're going to add 5 to both sides, and we're going to be left with x equals 5. We were able to find our two solutions using the difference of squares. Okay, so in this problem, we have x squared plus 4x minus 32 equals 0. Off the bat, I'm not seeing a perfect square. I'm not seeing a GCF. So I'm going to go ahead and try to use the X method. Okay? When doing this X method, I usually like to come and label what I know. My A, my B, and my C. My A is that first term, which is just going to be 1. My B is that middle term, which is just going to be 4. And my C is my constant, which is just going to be my negative 32. When using the X method, I know that the top is going to be my A times C, which will just be negative 32. My bottom is going to be my B, which is just 4. And now I want to find two numbers that are going to multiply to give me 32 and add to give me 4. So I'm thinking about the factors of 32, and we have 1 times 32. We have 2 times 16. We have 4 times 8. I'm looking at all these numbers, and I'm thinking that maybe 4 times 8 is going to work. We need to get negative 32 when we multiply. So one of these numbers is going to have to be negative, and they also have to give us a positive 4. So I'm thinking negative 4 and a positive 8. So that will make our new factors be x minus 4 times x plus 8 equals 0. And now we solve. X minus 4 equals 0. Add 4 to both sides. We're left with x equals positive 4. X plus 8 equals 0. Subtract 8 from both sides. We're left with x equals negative 8. We were able to find our two solutions using the X method. So I want you guys to take a minute. I have 3 problems here that I want you guys to try on your own. Okay? So for this first one, when you tried this, I hope that you recognize the difference of squares, because off the bat, we're seeing the subtraction and we're recognizing that 64 is a perfect square. We know when doing the difference of squares, it's just going to be the square root of 64 is 8. So we know we're going to have x minus 8 and x plus 8 equals 0. When we solve that, x minus 8 equals 0. We'll add 8 to both sides and we'll be left with x equals 8. Over here we have x plus 8 equals 0. We'll subtract 8 from both sides, and we'll be left with an x equals negative 8. So I hope you were able to get these two solutions on your own by using the difference of squares. When you looked at the second problem, not difference of squares, I'm not seeing a GCF, so I hope you thought to try the x method. Of course, when we're doing the x method, let's go ahead and label what we know. Our a should be 1, our b should be 2, and our c should be a negative 35. Again, we know that our top is going to be a times c, which is just negative 35, and we know that our bottom down here is just going to be our b, which is 2. We need two numbers, we need two numbers that are going to multiply to give us negative 35 and add to give us 2. I'm thinking about the factors of 35. We have 1 times 35, and honestly I can think of 5 times 7, and I'm recognizing that 5 times 7 is probably going to give us that 2 we need. Again, we need negative 35, so we know that one of these is going to be a negative number, because a positive times a negative will give us that negative. So let's try 5, 7, let's do negative 5. So we'll have x minus 5 and x plus 7 equals 0. So x minus 5 equals 0, add 5 to both sides, you'll be left with x equals 5, and x plus 7 equals 0, subtract 7 from both sides, we'll be left with x equals negative 7. This last one here, I'm recognizing that we have a GCF. I'm going to go ahead and take out a 3, and I'll be left with x squared minus 9 equals 0. I now see that this could also be the difference of squares. So we know that the square root of 9 is going to be 3, so this can just turn into x plus 3 times x minus 3 equals 0. When we solve this, x plus 3 equals 0, subtract 3 from both sides, we'll be left with x equals negative 3. X minus 3 equals 0, add 3 to both sides, we'll be left with x equals 3. And you were able to find your two solutions using GCF and the difference of squares. So just a quick recap for today's lesson. We learned how to solve quadratic equations using factoring by the GCF, the x method, and the difference of squares. Next week, we're going to practice using something called completing the square and quadratic formula. These are two different methods that are also going to help us solve quadratic equations, okay? So I hope that this lesson was easy to follow. You guys did a really great job, and I will see you guys in class next week.